Okay, I think we'll go ahead and get started. Thank you for taking the time to join us today. This is another opportunity for a listening session. So you will have, we'll do a brief overview with you related to our ESSER funds that we have received. And I know that people are asking, what's ESSER? What's ESSER 1? What's ESSER 2? What's ESSER 3? We're going to take some time to explain all of that this afternoon. And then we're going to give you an opportunity to ask any questions that you might have, and also to share some ideas of how you think we might be able to best use these funds to really work on some of the things, the impacts that we've had from COVID, and just some things that we would like to maybe try out during this time period as we re-enter school next year, and just a lot of different opportunities for us. So at this time, I am going to turn it over to Ryan Feely. Some of you all have met him. He is our new Director of Finance. I think he's now been with us a little over a year, but came during the COVID time, so a lot of people may not have met him yet. So Ryan, I'll turn it over to you at this time. And then when Ryan's done with his presentation, we'll go over a little with you how we will run the next part of the meeting.
Thank you, Dr. Lucero. So as Dr. Lucero said there, the purpose of this session is to give you an overview on the American Rescue Plan, or ARP grant, that will be made available to Stanford Public Schools, and then give you an opportunity to ask questions or make suggestions about how these funds should be used. But before we discuss the American Rescue Plan, I thought it might be helpful to review all of the federal COVID funds that Stanford Public Schools has received to date, because the ARP funds will be the fourth installment of federal COVID relief. And I know from speaking to many people in Stanford, in the district and outside, that it can be very confusing as to how much money there is and what it's for. So I will attempt to share my screen here. Are you able to see a screen with green on the top? Okay, all right. So this is a very high-level overview of the 4 federal COVID relief grants that Stanford Public Schools has received in the last 14 months. In March 2020, just after we closed the schools due to COVID-19, the federal government passed the CARES Act, which provided Stanford Public Schools with $2.7 million to help prevent, prepare for, and respond to the pandemic. These funds were designated ESSER 1, and ESSER stands for Elementary and Secondary Emergency Relief. And that comes through in all of these funds. Those funds would be good for just over 2 years through September 2022. And to date, we have spent or encumbered about half of that $2.7 million for PPE, specialized cleaning supplies, part-time custodians, distance learning software, and Wi-Fi hotspots. And so if you remember back to March of 2020, the federal government was just figuring out how to start dealing with the pandemic, and obviously realized months later that that initial allocation was not going to be sufficient to try to help schools across the country to reopen. So a few months later, Stanford Public Schools were allocated an additional $5.3 million via the Coronavirus Relief Fund under the same CARES Act. So on a federal level, all of the money was kind of created at the initial act, but then allocated over separate tranches. And these funds were intended to cover necessary non-budgeted expenses related to COVID-19. So again, if you were following our budget process last year, we didn't really budget for any COVID-related expenses because we had no idea what September would look like. And obviously, that was a common problem throughout the country. These funds would be available for a very short period of time. They had to be used in their entirety by December 2020. So we only had about 4 months to budget and spend $5.3 million. And we were able to do that. We put it to use in some of the same ways that we had the first portion, but in addition, we were able to sanitize buses, pay for special education evaluations, coverage for quarantining teachers, and our facilities team performed HVAC work throughout the district. Then in late 2020, right before New Year's, the CRRSA Act was passed. I don't know what that stands for. Coronavirus is in there somewhere. And shortly thereafter, Stamford Public Schools were allocated $12 million in a continued response to COVID-19. And these funds were designated as ESSER 2. And recently that allocation was increased to $14.5 million. These funds we're planning to use this year and next to offset our operating budget. So we're planning to use them to fund parent facilitators, tech specialists, restorative support facilitators, and classroom teachers, particularly in grades K through 2, to help manage class sizes, as particularly next year we return hopefully 100%. And this grant will also help fund this year's expanded summer school. One important note about this grant and these positions is that these positions were budgeted. They were part of our original operating budget that we compiled in late December, early January. So these positions were not added due to the money. We're just using the money to offset some operating costs to cover these positions. And then finally, out of the widely discussed $1.9 trillion American Rescue Plan Act, which was passed a couple of months ago, Stamford Public Schools have been allocated $32.6 million. I neglected to mention that the ESSER 2 funds are good through September 2023, so 2 years from the time of allocation. These new funds, which are designated as ARP ESSER, American Rescue Plan ESSER, or ESSER 3, these funds are good through September 2024. And for these funds, 20%, which is about $6.5 million, must be used to address the academic impact of learning loss. Overall, the funds are designed to reduce opportunity gaps, advance equity, provide safe school buildings, and bridge the digital divide. And for a bit more detail on the ARP ESSER funds, the guidelines note that access must be focused on K-12 populations most disproportionately impacted by COVID-19. This includes students of color, students with disabilities, English learners, students experiencing homelessness, disengaged youth, youth in foster care, students from low-income families, students involved in the justice system, and students who experience barriers to remote learning or whose progress was disrupted. The state of Connecticut has provided districts with a list of state-level priorities to guide decision-making, and the state requires that districts use evidence-based interventions when addressing the academic impact of learning loss. And some examples that the state has provided for authorized use of the funds include providing mental health services and supports, planning and implementing summer learning and after-school programs, school facility repairs and improvements to reduce the risk of virus transmission, and exposure to environmental health hazards. That's not an exhaustive list of what's allowed, but those 3 bullet points, I think, can give you a good indication of the breadth of spending that's covered under this act. And so when we've been discussing these funds since we learned of the allocation, our initial notions for the use of them are to continue some of the ESSER 2 spending for a 3rd year. Much of that would fit into the 20% learning loss category, and then to focus on capital improvements and one-time expenses, which could be programmatic expenses, because ideally we don't want to put ourselves in the position of having to make substantial cuts to positions once these funds have reached their end date in September 2024. And I hope I didn't speak too quickly and that the overview provided some clarity about these grants. And now we'll turn it back to Dr. Lucero to let us know how we can move forward with your questions and comments.
Thank you. So at this time, we are opening up to questions that follow-up questions that someone may have, or if you have any thoughts about how we might think about spending the ESSER funds. If you want to either put a question in the question answer chat, or you can put a statement there also, or you can raise your hand and Ms. Gonzalez will bring you over to the panel and you'll be able to share your idea. No one? I know there are people out there with ideas. Oh, here's one. Who is handling the chat for us?
I can read them for you, Dr. Lucero.
Okay, that's great.
This is from Yvonne. As a special education teacher, that size makes a huge difference in success for students. That was her comment.
Thank you. We will keep that in mind as I know that we are putting some things in place, especially in our early grades, so that we are paying attention to the amount of students who are in class sizes. So thank you for that comment.
Yvonne is raising her hand. I'm moving her over.
Great, thank you.
There we
Yvonne,
go.
can you unmute yourself?
Yeah,
Okay.
I just did it. Sorry, I just didn't realize how to
Great.
do it. Thank you. I did want to mention that, you know, when we were in the hybrid model, the students were doing so well with there being like 3 or 4 kids in the class. And then as the students have, you know, come in and so forth, now I have 11, you know, I really can't give that individual attention that I was able to when they were 3 or 4. And, you know, especially since they're special needs, I feel like that would be, you know, they really benefited tremendously from that time, you know, when there was, and the lower number of students in that class. And also on a separate note, I would also add that a comprehension class would also be really useful. I noticed that there are some districts that offer such a class, you know, because I've seen them come in with it on their IEP, and I think it really is beneficial for, you know, we have like a class for students with dyslexia to understand decoding, but I feel like something specific to comprehension really can be helpful for some kids who have that like particular area of concern as well.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate the feedback.
Yep, no problem. Thank you.
Now, Yvonne modeled that very well for all of us. Are there any other people out there who want to raise their hand? No comments? Well, come on. Should I call on some people? Should I look at who's here and start calling on people? No one has any questions about the funds? I think I'll talk a little bit then about, some people are asking, well, oh, Dr. Lucero, we're getting $32 million. Should we just, hire some additional people? And one of the reasons why we want to be very careful with that is that this is funding that we're getting for a very short period of time. And so if we are, let's say, hire 20 teachers right now, or 40 other staff members, then at the end of 3 years, when this money goes away, we have to be very careful in how we would then have, what would our budget look like in that year and those years following. So we want to be really careful that we're really thoughtful in how we're spending the money, but it is here so that we can do some of the things very similar to what Yvonne's talking about, is maybe give a little bit of reduced class sizes. So that's something that we might be able to do on a temporary basis. So that seems reasonable. Some of the things that special courses that if you have found that students are having struggles in particular areas during this COVID time, that we might be able to add some additional supports in that area. Yvonne talked about comprehension. So these are all things that, we have been talking about as a central office team, as administrators, and we've actually heard from many of the staff about what they've been thinking through our first listening sessions related to the budget. But we did want to give an opportunity, and actually this grant requires for us to give the opportunity for feedback related to how we spend the ESSER funds. But surprisingly, we already had this planned before we knew that that was a requirement. So we're ticking off 2 boxes here. We wanted to be able to give you this opportunity. We've really enjoyed these listening sessions. We talk about positive things that have come out of COVID, and this is one of them for me, is that being a district our size, it's not easy to all gather together in a particular location, and we release from schools at different times, so that becomes really complicated. But these Zoom meetings have given us the opportunity to have some two-way conversations with you. So in order to have a two-way conversation, someone has to talk to me. So does anyone have anything to say, or it's just a one-way conversation, me just talking? Oh, here we go. I see the question box is lit up again. Jen, what do we have? Oh, here's some more. Here we go.
Okay, so Janine Fox, how about after school and weekend clubs related to academic recovery?
Great.
The next one is from Vanessa. Oh, I'm sorry.
I'm just saying that it's a good example of the type of places that we are able to spend that money. It's now finding a structure for how we do that at each of the schools, but I think that's a great idea.
The next one is Vanessa C. Is there a possibility to add ELL self-contained classrooms for those students who have had little to no school and need to focus on learning the language?
Right.
The next one is an anonymous. Will there be a list of community partners?
Can the anonymous person, can I hear more about that if you don't mind becoming not anonymous, or write a little more in the box about what A list of community partners. How about go back to the ELL suggestion? I think that's a idea that we want to kind of vet through Monica Horschek to kind of have some conversations of what that would look like. I know that there are some requirements to being able to be with your like peers. So I want to kind of think through what that might look like. So we may reach out for some more conversations about that, but I do think to give more intense time to our students, especially as you described that we're not, that we're disengaged during this period of time, I think would be very helpful. Thank you to those who shared your ideas and anyone else that's out there.
From Marge, what can we use for the summer vendors as far as enrichment?
Oh, so for summer school, maybe. Do you think, Amy, that's what they're talking about?
It could be. What can we use for?
Yes, okay, we got a yes, that's
Yes.
what it is. So,
Okay.
okay, so Amy, do you want to kind of talk about how that process works and how other vendors can maybe be a part of this summer school?
Sure. So we are working with the United Way and SPEF to help us manage our after school or after extended hour part of summer school. And many vendors, they did sort of a capacity assessment with many of our community partners. And we have lots of different vendors who are interested in supporting our students during that 3-hour window after summer school officially ends. But students are invited to stay for extended time. We have, and they're helping us kind of coordinate it so that the kids have different experiences at each building. So there's lots of coding opportunities and sports opportunities, music opportunities, more traditional camp-like opportunities. And those vendors have agreed to move from site to site so that, again, every student has an opportunity to experience those fun activities in the afternoon. So I know we're working with the tennis camp, so it's going to be really fun, and potentially there's an opportunity to maybe continue some of these partnerships into the fall through ESH grants that schools get or other opportunities. So we're really excited about expanding this offering to our students who have signed up for that extra 3 hours of fun this summer.
Great. And that kind of speaks to the suggestion of after school programs and Saturday programs that I think an earlier person spoke about. I think that that extension would probably help with that. So it's a good one that we want to continue to note.
We have a message from Janine Fox. Would it be possible to use some of the funds for a middle school version of the DOMIS wraparound program for the most disengaged learners at all of the middle schools? I know it exists at West Hill and Stanford High. There's definitely a need at the middle schools.
Yes, good information. I do think that I know we have some family advocates at the middle school level, but I think it sounds like more a comprehensive program is what it sounds like she's describing. So we'll get that on the list.
I have Yvonne raising her hand again. Yvonne, you can unmute yourself.
Yeah, did I unmute myself?
Yes, you did.
Welcome back,
Okay.
Yvonne. We can hear you.
Okay. Yeah, I also was thinking about, the idea of, again, with special ed, we could use some iPads regarding for testing purposes. We need the newer iPads in order to be able to do the Wyatt 4, which is now on the iPad, and it doesn't have a paper version.
Okay.
So it would, that's just like it's just a legitimate need because we only have one that we're using for the whole school at the moment. And it's a really tough situation when it comes to testing.
Thank you for that. We appreciate your feedback, and we'll get that information to the technology people and with Michael Fernandez. Oh, someone just texted me and said that they might be being ordered already. I got 2 texts, Yvonne. I think you're actually going to get some iPads because I hear that I got 2 texts that said that they're on a list and they've been ordered. All right. Anyone else? Well, I don't want to hold. Oh, here we go. Here, see, every time I think we're going to end, it's a.
That's Yvonne saying thank you.
Oh, okay. Thanks, Yvonne. All right. Well, thank you all for taking your time to join us here today. If you think of something, this is not money we're going to spend overnight. So don't feel like we have to have the answers today or you're not going to have your say. This is something we're going to be very thoughtful about how we spend these important funds. So please reach out to your building principal, who we will be working very closely with as we're developing the plans for ESSER 3. And so if you have any ideas of things that you think that would really be impactful to our students, don't hesitate to reach out. You can also send emails if you know it falls into a particular area, like teaching and learning. You might send one to Amy Beldotti, Michael Fernandez, if it falls into the special education EL, and then Olympia Della Flora, if it's more family engagement type things, different professional development that you're interested in, social emotional support that you might be interested in us providing for students. So we're very open to conversations. We have some ideas that we will share, but it's always good to hear from our staff also. I will end by saying we are a little less than a month left in school, and I truly thank you for all that you've done to get us to this point. This has been a very interesting school year with a lot to navigate, and you all have stepped up to the plate each and every time we have asked you to in support of your students and their families. And I know they appreciate it, and I need you to know that I appreciate it and my team appreciates it also. So thank you so much for your time, and we will see you very soon. Take care.